right, hello everybody, and welcome to How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games. I'm Dan.
And I'm John.
And we're really excited to be coming to you today. This is actually the first episode that we've recorded in a couple months. We first launched in May, and this is the first episode we've recorded since then. So it's been fun, and we're excited to get back to recording again. And today we're going to be talking to you about Battleship. We're really excited to get to that, but first just wanted to let you know a few things. We've got a couple of shiny new microphones, so if we sound different, better, worse, please let us know in a review wherever you get your podcasts. And another announcement is that our very own John is turning 21 tomorrow. So this is his special birthday treat. He gets to talk about Battleship today. What do you think about that, John?
Oh boy, what a treat it is. If I could have picked a better game, I wouldn't have. I would have just picked Battleship. It is just such a pleasure to be coming to you guys the day before my birthday. I'm excited, and I'm ready to talk some strategy about everyone's favorite game, about naval warfare.
Whoa, hold on now, John. I don't think we're going to get to strategy quite yet. First, we're going to talk about the origins of the game of Battleship. So, as probably most people could imagine, Battleship, its origins are debated, but the game is thought to have come about as a pencil and paper game during World War I in France. So, World War I, one of the wars where that first featured battleships, or what we currently know as battleships. So that would make sense. However, some claim that the game came about much earlier and has parallels to earlier games, such as the 1890 game Basilinda, which involves sort of foot soldiers and cannons, but shares a lot of parallels with Battleship. And then some also say that Russian generals played before World War I. Not exactly sure what to make of it, except that there are lots of different theories. But the game exists sort of in a few different forms, which we're going to talk about later. But, the basic game is pretty easy to wrap your head around. The first commercial version of Battleship was actually called Salvo and released in 1931. These rules are slightly different from what most people think of as Battleship, and we'll get into them later. It's a bit of a faster-paced game, a little more explosive. But the first board and peg version of Battleship was introduced by Milton Bradley in 1967, and this is what most closely resembles the game that we know today.
Yeah, so over the years, a couple of things have changed, such as ship names, I think ship lengths. Have ship lengths changed, Dan?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Not in the board game version. In a few virtual versions, which we actually played to get ready for this podcast, the lengths are quite a bit different. So actually, some of the principles that we're going to talk about today won't really apply to proxy games such as Sea Battle, but just to the traditional Battleship.
Yeah, right. That was one of the interesting things that we came across as we were doing research for this podcast, was that there are tons of variants that you can find that will allow you to, quote-unquote, play Battleship for free, except none of them actually follow the original Hasbro rules. They all have some sort of twist, such as using different ships or using slightly different rules. But overall, they're quite similar, and it seems somewhat like, they've just changed one or two things and called it something different. You can even play over text now, so yeah.
Yeah. So definitely fun, especially when lots of people are still stuck indoors. It's nice to be able to play over your phone or over the internet with some of your friends. So we've talked about some ambiguations in the rules. And so without further ado, we're actually going to enter our Rules Blitz segment so that we can all be on the same page when we're talking about strategy later. So let's go to Rules Blitz.
All right, take it away.
All right. Welcome to Rules Blitz for Battleship. Battleship is a two-player game. Each player has two 10x10 grids, the ocean grid and the target grid.
The ocean grid is where the player places their ships. The target grid is where they keep track of the shots they've taken at their opponent's ships.
Each player owns 5 ships. Each ship has a length measured in grid spaces.
The 5 ships are the aircraft carrier, the battleship, the destroyer, the submarine, and the patrol boat. Their lengths are 5, 4, 3, 3, and 2 grid spaces, respectively.
At the beginning of the game, each player places their ships on their own ocean grid. Each ship may be placed either vertically or horizontally, but not diagonally. The ships may touch, but may not overlap.
Players alternate firing their rounds by calling out 1 point on the grid each round.
Each round, the non-shooting player is required to divulge whether the shot resulted in hit, miss, or sunk.
If a ship was sunk, the player whose ship was sunk must say which ship was sunk. For example, "You sunk my carrier."
The first player to sink all 5 opposing ships wins the game.
Alrighty, and that was Rules Blitz. So without further ado, I think we're going to get into a bit of strategy. So, Dan, what are kind of the areas where strategy is going to come into play when you're playing Battleship?
So this game is pretty simple. You have placing your ships, you have searching for your opponent's ships, and then you have what to do if you hit an opponent's ship. I think that's the 3 main categories it boils down to.
Gotcha. Okay, and so I think we're going to start off with the placement of the ships, right?
Yep, that's right. So, John, what do you think is probably the best single strategy to place your ships?
Well, I don't know. I always used to just kind of make cool patterns, like to make S shapes, circles.
Nice. Okay. Well, it turns out, and this might make sense, or it might seem like a pretty strong claim, but it turns out random placement seems to be the best way to place your ships. So the reason it might seem like a strong claim is because it doesn't seem like there's any skill involved. So like, how can you really be good at randomly placing your ships? But if you think about it a little bit from a game theoretical perspective, and game theory is something we will talk a lot about on this show, I think there's a lot of interesting elements of it in Battleship. But if you have any sort of pattern that you like to play, for instance, like placing your ships in a circle or in an S shape, or perhaps you really like placing your ships toward the edge, or you really like putting them in the center. If there's any sort of discernible pattern in how you place your ships, a rational opponent is eventually going to pick up on this pattern. So they may not get it the first game, but they may figure it out after a few rounds. And then that pattern is not going to be effective anymore. You would have been better off just placing them randomly from the get-go, because your opponent can never get any better if your placement is truly random.
Gotcha. So I guess it's more about being unpredictable than it is about actually being good, right?
Exactly.
There's no best way to put your ships, or else people would just know where to guess right away.
Exactly. And it's kind of like what in rock, paper, scissors, what is the best character to play? Rock, paper, or scissors? Well, obviously, if you think rock is the best and you play rock every time, you're going to lose almost every time. You might win the first couple times. Eventually, when your opponent figures out you just play rock all the time, you're never going to win again. Right. So, usually when you play Battleship, the game goes pretty quickly and you play multiple rounds. So that's just something to keep in mind in terms of wanting to mix up your strategies and be unpredictable.
Gotcha. And so I guess that kind of is interesting to think about, that this game doesn't involve any dice rolling or, coin flipping, but it's definitely very much involved with random chance still. Even though each of you is playing and putting your ships in specific spots, I feel like the fact that you don't have perfect information, like you don't know where your opponent's ships are, means that essentially it is like a lot about chance, right?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of funny you say that because, yeah, technically there is no chance in this game, but you kind of have to play as if there is chance because, if your opponent isn't playing randomly, you should be trying to spot the pattern, and then it won't be random anymore, or it won't be a game of chance anymore. But it sort of becomes a game of chance if each player is placing their ships optimally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm probably diving into stats a little bit too early here, but hey, it's my birthday. I deserve this.
Happy birthday.
But it's something like a lot of my professors would say when you're talking about, I don't know, if you're like testing something random, a lot of people want to say, oh, we think there's a 95% chance that this drug cures cancer. But the thing is, the drug either cures cancer or it doesn't. We just don't know which of that it is yet. So the probability of it curing cancer is actually 0 or 1. We just can only be 95% confident that it does.
Right. That's a really interesting way to put it.
Like the ships are there, but you can only be so confident that there's going to be a ship on a certain space, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So each time you call out a square to fire at your opponent, your probability of a hit is either 0 or 1.
Right.
But you have a certain level of confidence as to whether your opponent's ship is actually there.
Right.
You might think it's 50-50, or you might think it's 2/3 to 1/3, but in reality, it's either 1 or 0.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
It's either going to hit or miss. Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Cool. So, so now that we've kind of established that you really should try your best to place your ships randomly.
It's kind of like how do you do that? How do I play something randomly?
Yeah, like as a human, it's it may be very difficult to actually place things randomly. There's a lot of examples in film of how humans mess up with this. There was this really cool episode of Numbers where they Numbers is like they use math to solve like forensic problems and crimes.
It's a drama. It's not a real show, by the way.
Yeah. So it's it's fiction, but I think instructive in a lot of ways. So they ended up locating where the criminal was because like the sites of the different crimes that they had committed were sort of evenly spaced out, and so they could tell that like this human was trying to randomly space things out, in order to make it impossible to figure out what their location was. But because they were human and they couldn't do that correctly, the like forensic technology and basically just math was able to shed some light on like where the locus of this person's I guess power influence ended up being. So that was really cool. So the reason for that anecdote is like humans just are really bad at actually conceptualizing what randomness is. Like I think we've talked a lot about on this show flipping a coin. So if you flip a coin 100 times and you show a human the results of that coin flip, true randomness is going to give you, you might see a string or two of like 10 heads in a row or like 8 tails in a row. And you show that to a human and the human says, well, is this really random? Because I only expect to see like 4 or 5 in a row before I think, something's fishy. So I guess what we're trying to say is in order to place your ships in a more random way, you have to do some things that are somewhat counterintuitive to what you as a human think randomness is.
Yeah, they might not feel entirely random, but it's like in reality, when you have a random process, it's actually going to produce configurations that you might think look like a pattern, right? But it's kind of just sort of processes in our brain that let us find patterns in things, right? So, for example, like having ships that spell out something is like technically possible through randomness, but we would never think of it as a random occurrence. So, yeah, and so I think like it's important to remember, and when we say like completely random, there are like maybe a few guidelines that you'd want to consider, and then within these guidelines, you're going to want to try and make it as random as possible. So what would be some of those rules of thumb, I guess?
Sure. So one rule of thumb, and these are not all originally thought out by us, but these come from some of our sources, which we're going to include in the show notes. But one tip is to place your ships asymmetrically. So random placement will involve more clustering of ships than a normal human would expect. In other words, they'll be less evenly spaced out. So one example of asymmetric placement would be, instead of having roughly the same number of ships on the left side of the board and the right side of the board, maybe you have 4-1 on your right side versus your left side, or maybe you even have all of your ships on your right side. Or maybe, if you were to cut the board diagonally like a crisp grilled cheese, maybe you have all of your ships on one side of that diagonal, for example. So there's many different ways you could do this, and you definitely, like we've been saying, you don't want to do the same thing every time, but you should keep that in mind. Maybe use this asymmetry more often than not. Another good example that I came across was place all of your ships in the same direction. So all vertically or all horizontally, because usually people will expect that there's going to be some sort of mix.
Yeah, I can see that. So I can see that there's maybe sort of 3 variables in this thing that you're trying to mix up, right? And so there's like the row that you're going to put the ship on, the column that you're going to put it on, and then the orientation. So it's like, well, and of course, like it's different if the ship's turned one way, you're going to have to decide like where to put the middle of the ship, for example. But yeah, like you kind of want to vary all these things, and all of these things could like, randomly, perchance you could get a lot of ships in like only like the last 3 rows or something like that. It's definitely possible. And it would, yeah. I remember basically like when I was a kid playing, and the like trick that I feel like people would pull would be that they'd put all their ships in one big clump in the corner. Mm-hmm. And while like generally I think that that's bad, and we'll see why it can be bad. It's definitely like it's valid for like one game, right? And then I just wouldn't do it again anytime soon. Mm-hmm. It's one formation, and it could happen randomly that you get them all clustered in one corner of the board, right? Or all the ships get put in one corner of the board.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I think something I thought of while you were talking is, if you talk about these like rows, columns, and what was the third? Orientation of the ship. If you think of each one of those being decided by, say, a coin flip, or maybe you have like a 10-sided die to say, okay, the front of this ship is going to be in column. I got a 5, so it's E. And then I rolled a 7, so it's going to be 7. It's going to be E7, and then maybe I flip a coin, and if it's heads, it's vertical, and if it's tails, it's horizontal. If you were to place your ships like that, you would effectively get like a random placement of ships, and you would end up with like more clustering, and you would end up with more instances of like all the ships being the same way than like we would think of as a human. So I thought that was a helpful way to conceptualize this placement as well. of course, the reason we're sort of giving you these techniques is because you don't have a 10-sided die when you're placing your ships. So it is sort of still an art. So, even if you're trying to do this perfectly, you're not going to perfectly vary or mix your strategies, but it's going to be better than if you just tried to, like, quote, place your ships randomly as a human. You won't, like, it'll be closer to random than just trying to be random, if that makes any sense at all.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, for one, I'm not trying to be rolling a 10-sided die 10 times every time I play a game of Battleship, and then I think that might give away something to your opponent.
Yeah, exactly.
If they see the rolls. So, yeah, it's like it's just an interesting situation. Whereas people, we're going to try and come as close as we can to simulating these things that, like, we actually can do pretty well with just objects around the house, like a coin flip, right?
Right.
But in our minds, it can be a bit tougher. Yeah. And so the next thing I think that we have with as far as where to place your ships is that another thing that people might do in trying to mimic randomness is that they might not ever put a ship towards the edge. They might think that that's sort of too obvious, or they might also think that it's somewhat of an inferior place to place a ship, which can happen because for various reasons, but because essentially if a ship on the edge gets hit, then your opponent doesn't have as many places to go with their next hit, so they're kind of more likely to hit your ship again. And so, but I guess what we're trying to say is that randomness will tell you that sometimes the ship will be on the edge, and in fact that will actually be helpful to you because opponents might assume that you wouldn't put a ship on the edge because it's, like, not as good of a place naturally. And so something like that is kind of like playing mind games with your opponent, and a bit of it is like knowing how much your opponent is really going to read into this game, right? If you're generally if you're playing with kids, they're probably not thinking this far ahead already. But if you're playing with someone who's a Battleship pro, which I don't know, there's probably Battleship professionals somewhere.
There's gotta be.
Yeah. These people might, think that an edge placement is somewhat inferior, so they would be less likely to guess there because it would be not as good of a move to place a ship there. So it almost sort of balances out where you have like a ship placement that's like slightly worse, but it's but the like benefit of the doubt that you get from your opponent is sort of makes it a pretty decent place to place a ship.
Yeah, I think a good way to put it is just because in a certain way it's inferior to a ship in the center, in the sense that if it's hit, you have fewer options that you have to guess before you get your next hit, which we're going to talk more about targeting later. Just because this is inferior in this sense does not mean never, as in like you should never place it here. So naturally you're going to think like you're going to think you should put it here less than you actually should put it there. If it was random, you're random and correctly adjusted for this this inferior probability. So I think we also wanted to get into some don'ts of ship placement. So I've only got a couple right here in terms of the cross section of the game. And then, of course, we're going to get into game repetition, which we've talked a little bit about already. But one don't that I have here, and this is sort of along the same lines of placing your ships on the edge, but I think it's even a little more important, and it's don't place your ships next to each other. And this is because it makes it easier for your opponent to accidentally find one. So essentially, if you have two ships that are touching and somebody hits the end of one ship, maybe they're guessing that ship continues either in the left direction or the right direction. And so like they might guess in the right direction, which turns out to be where your other ship is. So now your opponent has a hit on 2 ships, which is really bad, which we'll come to later. But essentially, once you've got a hit, it's only a matter of 2 or 3 turns before, maybe a little more. It's only a matter of time before that ship is sunk. Whereas if you're still searching, it could be any time that they eventually find a hit. So you really want to avoid that possibility as much as possible. And again, like, bad doesn't necessarily mean never because of repeated games, but you should be mindful that, like, strategically this has real downsides.
Yeah, and I think this one is, you can make more of a case for basically doing this never, because even if your opponent doesn't expect it, they will happen upon it
right
when they're looking at your other ships. And so this one I think you can probably get away with doing it every once in a while, but I personally would never do it. Just because your opponent doesn't run into it because they expect it. They run into it because they're playing correctly. And so if they're playing correctly and they hit your ship and they go next to your ship and they hit another ship, you may confuse them, but confusion doesn't really matter too much when the game is taking turns.
Yeah.
And your opponent can take a few seconds to just think about what's going on, and then they figure out, oh, okay, there's just 2 ships here, and now they've massively had an advantage because they've found 2 of your ships. And I think it's, like, important to think about the fact that the first hit on a ship is the most important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think back to playing when I was younger, and I would get a hit and be, like, expecting a ship to be sunk, and they don't say sunk. So, like, I've got 5 hits in a row and no sunk, and I'm like, wait, what? That's weird. So I am confused, but it doesn't make me any worse off in the game being confused, because all I have to do is, like, guess in the other direction, sink the carrier, and then now I have another ship to work on. So that, like, momentary confusion, really is most of the time not worth taking this risk. I mean, that in general is not worth taking this risk. And, we can, like, maybe it's justified under a mixed strategy equilibrium. I'm using all these heady game theory terms, but,
we get it,
bad.
Dan.
It's
you
not
took
worth
7
it.
classes this quarter. We understand. Yeah.
Oh man.
No, but I totally agree. Okay, so I think now we're going to get into another topic called game repetition. But before that, we're going to take a quick break. So we will be right back with you guys. And we'll see you in a minute. And we're back. All right. Well, we are refreshed. It has been, approximately 36 hours. What, 24? I don't know.
About 24 hours.
24 hours. Yep. We had some technical difficulties that prevented us from continuing after our break. But we're coming to you now, and I'm coming to you now as a real boy. Now I'm 21, and we are ready to get back into the action.
Awesome. You're finally old enough to podcast legally.
I know. It's before I've just been a rogue podcaster, but now we can keep going and be a legitimate business. So
cool. All right. So you mentioned before the break that we want to talk about game repetition. So essentially what we've been talking about so far is placing your ships and trying to approximate randomness, and sort of different techniques that you can follow. But a key in Battleship is that usually when you play with someone, you're not just going to sit down and play one game, because usually the games are pretty quick, maybe like 10, 20 minutes max. So you really want to be able to vary your strategy so that you're, like we said before, so like in as much as your opponent can sort of figure out a pattern of how you're playing, they'll be better off because they can eliminate parts of your board and shoot at a more concentrated spot and basically just have a more efficient attack unless you can truly be unpredictable. And so what we want to get to here is that even though we have talked a lot about what are good strategies to place your ships, the key is to maybe not follow these strategies every game. So like even though it might be you might be losing a little bit by putting a ship on the edge, like for example, you want to every once in a while put a ship or two on the edge because you still want your opponent to think, all right, maybe I should shoot there. You don't want your opponent to say, oh, well, they'll never place their ship on the edge because it's a bad move, so I don't even have to shoot on the edge.
Right, yeah. And so I think an important thing is that you just don't want your opponent to be able to think that they know what's coming next just because of how you played in the game before. So basically, however you play in one game shouldn't really affect how you're going to play in the next game. And I guess this is mostly talking about ship placement as the mostly like and what we'll talk about, like when you're trying to search for your opponent's ship. Generally, like you might not need to vary that too much, but really the pattern in which you like place your ships should be. It should try to make it as different as possible. Well, no, that's wrong too, right? You just want to make it random, make it independent of what you did the game before. So if you put all your ships in the bottom right corner of the game before, doesn't matter. Just don't even think about that when you're deciding where to place your ships the next game.
Yeah, and I think a good analogy here is rock, paper, scissors. So like if you played rock the first turn, you don't want to tell yourself, okay, I played rock and I won, so I should play rock again, because then that's a predictable pattern, and if you keep doing that, your opponent will capitalize on it. But you also don't want to say, I played rock last turn, so I should try to quote be random and not play rock the next turn, because that's also not random. Your opponent knows that you're not going to play rock, and so they can capitalize on it again if you continue playing this pattern. So like John said, the best thing to do is to forget about what you did the previous turn. Just sort of I guess roll the dice in your mind, like we were talking about earlier. Like roll the 2 10-sided dice and flip a coin and see where it lands. Metaphorically speaking, and that's over the long haul. That should be how you win on your placements.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that's about all we have to say for game option, right, Dan?
Yeah, I think so. So we're going to shift gears into, I think, maybe the fun part, which is shooting at your opponent's ships. So we're going to break this up into 2 areas. One is what's called the hunt, and second is what's called target mode. These are not original. We got these from a paper that we're going to include in the show notes. A very fascinating paper, by the way. So the first thing we're actually going to say here, which might seem counterintuitive because we just told you how to place your ships and that you should really try to place randomly. So we're actually going to tell you that when you're shooting, you should really not shoot in a random fashion. There are much better ways to get the most, I guess, bang for your buck, or I guess the most ship for your bang. So rather than sort of talk about why randomness is bad, we're just going to give you a few examples of things you can do that give you a markedly better better outcome than shooting randomly. So one of these things is, so we're going to talk about hunt mode first. All right, so hunting is when you have not hit any ships yet, or maybe you've sunk a ship or two, but you don't have any hits, any ships that you've hit and are working on. So you're just searching for a new ship. All right, so one thing that you can do to really increase your coverage of the board is to guess diagonally. So this way you get a new row and column each time, which essentially maximizes the number of rows and columns that you guess. And, we'll talk more about this later, but can help you sort of close off areas of the board faster than just shooting in a purely random fashion.
Right. And yeah, so I think the idea is sort of that if you hit and miss somewhere, then because of the way ships are placed, then there's actually a slightly less chance that there's a ship immediately to the left or immediately adjacent to the spot where you just missed. Because it's pretty, like, the ship would have to be just on the edge or ending right before the place where you missed your shot, right? So, however, if you move to a new row in a column, you're basically maximizing like the space that you search.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So that makes sense. So I think maybe what would be helpful is a quick illustration. So imagine you have. We're gonna just consider this one-dimensionally. So we're only gonna consider horizontal. And let's say you've missed twice, and there are 5 squares in between this miss. Right. So we've got 5 ships, right? We've got a 5, a 4, a 3, a 3, and a 2, right? So your aircraft carrier, the 5, if this is in this set of 5 squares between the misses, it can only be in one potential spot, across all 5, obviously. Now, the battleship can either be in the first 4 or the second 4. The destroyer or the submarine can be in the first 3, the middle 3, or the last 3. And finally, the patrol boat can be either in the first 2, the next 2, the middle 2, the second to last 2, or the last 2, right? So if you sort of overlay all of these ships on top of each other, the most likely spot for at least one of these ships to be for any of these positions to result in a hit is that space right in the middle. So basically what John's saying is, like, when you have a miss, so I guess to finish off the point, so that's where you should fire, is the middle, because it gives you the greatest chance of, like, hitting a ship.
Yeah, and right, like the only time you miss in that scenario is if it's the patrol boat, and it's not in the middle at all, and it's just in the first 2 or the last 2 of the 5 squares. So every other scenario, you're going to get a hit, right?
Right, exactly.
If there's a boat in there.
Yeah. So basically, what John's saying earlier is, like, once you have a miss, you should go and try to shoot at a different row or column, because when you have that miss, those spaces immediately around that miss are only able to be occupied by the ends of boats, in a vertical or horizontal direction. So in essence, those spaces are less likely to have a ship. So you should shoot, a few spaces away from those misses.
The ships don't necessarily have to be at the end, because they could be turned a different way.
Right, exactly.
But basically, if you guess a point and then you go to the left of that square, you can no longer have a ship that passes through the square horizontally, right? You can only have a ship that goes to the left of that square horizontally. But vertically, it could still be in the middle of the ship.
Right, exactly. Okay, so that's kind of I guess a basic rationale for like, I guess, spreading out like in a diagonal. And when we say in a diagonal, we don't necessarily mean 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along the diagonal. Like maybe you do B2 and then like what is it, I9, for example, and then later you do like E5. So not necessarily like all of your shots fired at once. I mean, you could still vary it up, but shoot along one diagonal and then shoot along another diagonal. And John, I think you had another sort of reason in terms of like eliminating potential locations of ships that made more sense when it comes to like why diagonals make sense.
Yeah, basically, so say you have you're shooting along the long diagonal, which is like from the bottom left corner to the top right corner of the board, for example, and then you move down 2 rows, right? So then you shoot every square that's exactly 2 rows below a point on that long diagonal, right? So once you make these kind of like 2 parallel diagonal bands, that there's no ships in between them if you don't hit anything, because there's only like spaces of 1. There's like not enough room in between the diagonals for a ship to be hiding. So you can kind of use like diagonals as a very efficient way to block off entire parts of the board where you think there just can't be a ship there anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So, if you're able to block off a position of the board where you don't have to shoot there anymore, then obviously you're better off, because there's a higher chance that where you are shooting will contain a ship, and so you'll have to shoot fewer shots, other things being equal.
Right. And this is maybe this is like best visually explained through the kind of checkerboard analogy, right? So you can kind of imagine the battleship board just like you'd imagine checkerboard. Think about there's white spaces and black spaces, and they alternate. Every other space is white, and every other space is white, and every other space is also black. But
we get it.
It's checkerboard, and essentially what you can do is only fire on, for example, the white squares, or only on the black squares. And by doing this, you kind of like take away half of the squares that you would need to fire on in total. So as opposed to having 100 squares on the board, you only have 50 white squares. However, there's no ship that can exist only on black squares, because they have to reach horizontally or vertically. So even the 2-length ship of the patrol boat has to exist on a black square and a white square. So you will eventually hit it if you're only hunting on white squares. So if you stay kind of along the diagonals, this is the kind of effect that you'll have. You'll make almost a checkerboard where you're only hitting the white squares.
Right, exactly. So, and then another key point with this is you mentioned that the checkerboard makes sense because the patrol boat is the smallest boat and it only goes 2 squares across. And obviously you can't place diagonally, so it's going to have to exist on 1 white square and 1 black square. Some of the new virtual editions of Battleship, that aren't called Battleship for a variety of reasons, but the ones you play on your phone, the shortest ship is actually only 1 square. So the checkerboard idea just doesn't work here. You'll have to sort of, you still want to do diagonals and such, but you can't like just not fire on half of the board. You're gonna miss stuff. But another, I think, more juicy and applicable idea here in terms of Battleship, the classic game, is if you are so fortunate to sink your enemy's patrol boat early, then you are in a fantastic position, because now your opponent's shortest ship is their destroyer or submarine, which is 3 squares. So now you can you can divide the board into groups of 3. So let's say now you have black squares, white squares, and gray squares. So your opponent's destroyer is going to exist on a black square, a white square, and a gray square, no matter what. So now you can further subdivide your board, and let's say you can only fire at the gray squares, and so you have to take even fewer shots in order to hit all your opponent's ships. So, if you sink the patrol boat, really be mindful of, streamlining your search in this way.
Yeah, and you can always just think of it easily as like, okay, like could a submarine even fit in this spot? Once you've sunk the patrol boat, you just need to think about, can something that's 3 long even fit here? And if it can, yeah, go ahead and feel free to like use that as a target or a place to shoot at. But there's no reason to even look at places where there's only 2 consecutive squares, because there's just guaranteed to be nothing there now that you sunk the patrol boat. So this is a huge advantage to your opponent who can't even be sure about anything that's 2 consecutive squares long. They think the patrol boat could potentially be in there.
Exactly. So, again, to reiterate your point, do not shoot into spaces that cannot be possibly occupied by an opposing ship. This might seem obvious, but it's just important to keep in mind. Just don't fire blindly. And it's a big reason why, like, firing with a purpose is better than firing randomly. Because if you were firing randomly, you would end up firing into some of those spaces that couldn't possibly house a ship.
Mm-hmm. And to like kind of figure out whether a ship could be there, there's this kind of term of the overlay, right, Dan? Can you explain what that means?
Yeah. So the overlay is kind of like what I talked about earlier. In thinking about like, could an aircraft carrier be here? Yes. Like let's take the 5 square example. So like, could the aircraft carrier be here? Yes. Okay. Could the battleship be here? Yes. Could the destroyer be here? Yes. And so on and so on and so on. And so if you sort of iterate this like over every for every boat, over like for every possible orientation that it could exist on the board, then like you will find out like which grid space is the most likely to have one of the ships, based on the fact that like the carrier could be here in this way, and also the battleship could be here in this way, but also in this way, and also flipped vertically in this way. So this is very hard to do as a human, and obviously it's a pretty big board, but so computers can do this really, really easily, and that's what one of the papers is about. But you can make it easier on yourself by, let's say, splitting the board up into quarters and saying like, where could each ship be in this quadrant, and maybe shooting the optimal square in this quadrant, because maybe that's a little easier to figure out, you don't have to think quite as hard too.
Right. And I think, well, in general, like the rule of thumb is going to be that the square that's has the most open spaces around it is going to be the most likely to have a ship on it, because, for example, like a point towards the edge can't really have a ship on it that's pointing off of the edge, but it can have a ship facing any other direction. Whereas a point in the middle of the board can have ships on it that are facing any direction and that are going through at any point. You can have a ship that's that point can be in the middle of a ship. That point can be on the end of a ship. So just in general, like a middle point where you know that like everything around that point isn't either a miss or a hit yet for you. That point's going to probably be better to shoot at than a point that's right next to a bunch of misses or even hits.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So I think that's all we had on hunt mode, and we're gonna talk really quick about target mode, and then we'll get into a few possible rule variations that can make the game more interesting and that you should be aware of. for time's sake, we won't we won't jump super deeply into those, but we thought they'd be fun to bring up for further study. So target mode, like what do you do once you've hit an opponent's ship? So like, you know, I shout E4 and you say hit. Okay, what do I want to do next?
Well, you kind of just, I mean, you need to find out which direction the ship's going in, right? So I think you try and fire at the adjacent squares. So you go either, well, it's E4, so, you know, you can do D4, or you can do F4, or you can do E3 or E5, right? So either up, down, left, or right from that one. But where did you go first?
Yeah, so I think this is... So for one, I don't think the potential loss is too great wherever you go, but it's important to keep in mind. So the overlay principle should apply here as well. So if you've got a hit on E4, and you had a miss on like C4, but you don't have any other misses on that fourth file or fourth rank. You know, again, let's stick with horizontal for ease of visualization. You would probably rather shoot at F4 than D4 because it's more likely that that there are ships on that right side of E4 than on that left side, given that you've got a miss on C4, right? Because, you know, if you do all that overlaying in your head, you know, it should be clear that like all of these ships could like you know, could be on like F4 or G4 in like a variety, like their first square or their second square or their third square, however long they are, could continue in that direction. Whereas if you're going to the left, you know, you can only have that last square, like it ends on D4, right? Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if I explained it super well.
No, and I think again, it's one of those things where it's going to be pretty hard to do all the math in your head yourself. But the general rule of thumb is just kind of pick the side that's more open and shoot in that direction, as opposed to shooting towards other misses and other hits that you have. So yeah, I mean, and that's pretty much it when it comes to targeting, right? Because, you know, it's once you hit the ship, there's only a couple places you're going to go, really.
Exactly.
And I think the important thing is to kind of just recalculate as you go which side is more open. Like, for example, in the 5 square row problem we were talking about earlier, so there's 5 tiles. Say you hit in the middle, or you shoot in the middle and you hit, and then you say, okay, it's equally, there's 2 spaces open to the right and 2 spaces open to the left, so it doesn't matter. So you go left, and then you hit. So now you've hit in the middle square and the first square to the left. Now it's actually more open to the right of both of those hits.
Right.
There's 2 open spaces as opposed to just 1 now. So you probably should go now and shoot at the right side of your line of 2 as opposed to the left. And so just remember to keep this in mind. Like, as you're going, it's okay to like not just keep going in one direction as you're shooting, as you're in target mode. Right. You can kind of go back the other way too, if it makes more sense to
Definitely.
do that.
Yeah, and I think here it's really important to remember what you said earlier, which is forget what happened before. Like, what does the board look like now, and where is the ship most likely to be?
Right. Yeah.
You know. So cool. And then one more point I just wanted to add was, and this is really simple but important. Pay attention to when you sink or don't sink a ship. So, like, if you hit 5 in a row and you don't hear sunk, wait, that's well.
Or if you
I
don't,
I guess that's no. Anyway, sorry. So, let's see. Yeah. So I guess if you have 5 hits in a row. Wow, I'm really having trouble with this.
So basically what he's saying is just make sure that however many hits you have lines up with whatever they tell you. So if they only tell you that you sunk their submarine, and yet you have 4 hits in a line, there's got to be another ship going on there. So this is like just simple, and it's probably was only going to happen if your opponent's playing kind of subpar. But definitely keep an eye out for it and make sure you pay attention to what they say you sunk and how many hits that would actually take. Or if you're not sinking anything, then there's got to be a lot of ships there pretty much. Yeah. And another thing I would say is that keep in mind that these kind of squares adjacent to the ships, so the squares along the sides, once you do find ships, I would try and stay away from these as when you're in hunting mode. Because just in general, it's going to be a little bit less likely that your opponent's going to place their ships next to each other, for the reasons that we talked about earlier. It's not really a great move. So, keep this in mind as you're hunting, that you kind of want to stay away. You want to stay on your checkerboard, and you want to stay away from adjacent squares to stuff you've already hit. And this is that's already going to make sense if you're using the overlay method. Generally, you're not going to fire close to boundaries that you've already looked at. So you're not going to fire close to your own hits because it's probably not going to be the best use of a shot anyway. So just keep that in mind.
Cool. All right. So I think we've covered standard Battleship. But we may have missed something. So if you think we missed something, then you can email us at HTBYKABG@gmail.com. That's our initials, how to beat your kids at board games. So now we're going to go into some fun possible rule variants and how they might affect your strategy. So one possible rule variant is you are not required to call out sunk, when your opponent sinks one of your ships. In the traditional rules, you are, and you have to say which ship was sunk. So if you don't have to do that as an attacker, and maybe as a placer too, how would your strategy change?
Well, I think that not having to give up this information makes it a lot more strong to put your boats into clumps. It may, or at least makes it less bad to do so, because your opponent won't know when they've knocked out your patrol boat, so they can never really narrow down their search. It can be good to make things ambiguous because they might shoot 5 in a row, and they might hit you 5 times in a row and think that they've gotten your carrier, but actually they've gotten multiple ships. Overall, though, I think probably just putting all your ships in a big clump is still probably pretty bad. I don't know. It still lets your opponent stay in target mode more often than being in hunt mode. So
yeah, because when they're targeting a ship, they're going to be looking at those ships, those spaces adjacent to your ship. So they're automatically targeting there. And so if you have another ship placed in one of those spaces, it's much more likely that they'll accidentally hit one. Yeah.
And I think one thing that we thought about is that you don't necessarily want to make sure you outline, you don't want to stay in target mode too much when you're firing. You don't need to prove that you've sunk a ship. For example, if you have a line of 4 hits, you don't need to shoot at every adjacent square around it just to make sure that you're not hitting multiple boats, because I think that's kind of just a waste of time. So once you stop getting hits consistently, I would maybe go back into hunt mode, basically.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so another possible variation is, this is kind of an interesting one. Sometimes players can move a ship every 5 turns. Now, I've never seen anybody actually play this way, but I kind of saw it as a possible variant on the internet. So what are your thoughts on what this might do sort of as an attacker, if your opponent might be moving their ships every 5 turns? One ship, I guess.
Well, first of all, I'd say this is a pretty cool variant because it does allow for a bit more skill and kind of player experience to come in. What I like about it is that it actually does kind of incentivize you as a player who's firing, as an attacker, to kind of vary up where you shoot, to just maybe not shoot along just one diagonal. because the more predictable your shooting is, then the easier it will be for your opponent to move their ship out of the way. So I feel like that's like the big thing with this one is that you have to be ready to shoot anywhere, or else your opponent can just kind of read you and move their ship away from your shots.
Right. So basically, you might want to, I guess, perhaps change the direction or like change the diagonal you're firing on, if you're using that strategy. But like in principle, you don't want to change the principles with which you're hunting. Like you're not going to all of a sudden start shooting at adjacent squares. You're still going to do a diagonal. It might just be a different one.
Yeah. This is probably makes the game go a little longer. I would guess.
Definitely, yeah, and it adds a little bit of
mind games.
Mind games for sure, but you give like the reason you can be more sort of strategic and methodical when you're targeting, but when you're placing, you want to be random, is because your opponent can't move their ships, so they can't respond to your pattern. In the normal game, the pattern of your targeting. When they can respond to the pattern of your targeting, it means that your targeting, your hunting has to be a little bit more varied than it normally would. So it's kind of a cool element that adds to the game.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, and then lastly, we wanted to talk about Salvo. So we mentioned Salvo in the beginning of this podcast as the first commercial version of this wonderful game of Battleship that came out in 1931. So Salvo is really cool, really explosive, like we said. So the reason it's so explosive is because you get not one, but 5 shots in the beginning of the game. And then thereafter, you get as many shots per turn as you have ships alive on your grid. So this game naturally can go pretty fast. And so I guess what I would ask is, how does this mechanic change how you target? How does it change how you place, if any? And, once you hit a ship, maybe how does it affect what you do next?
Yeah. So I personally don't know that I would really change up anything about how I would place my ships. Mm-hmm. But what I do know is that this is going to really speed up the hunt mode, because obviously firing 5 shots into the grid is going to be a lot more likely to get you 1 hit. But the interesting thing is that you don't know, I believe you don't know that you've hit until you've fired all 5 shots, correct?
Well, I saw a couple different versions of this. So one is, I think you fire all 5 shots, and then your opponent has to say like hit, miss, or something like that in order. But then there's another version which is kind of kooky, that they can just say like 2 hits, 3 misses. And so you don't know at all like which ones were hits and which ones were missed. So I don't even know where to start with that one.
That one might need another episode.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I mean, I would say but yeah, in the first case where I'll find out afterwards which of your shots were hits, mm-hmm. It's going to make target mode a little bit harder, because you can't really know what direction the ship's going until you've fired all your shots. So like one thing that I thought of to kind of remedy this is that you might actually want to, once you get a single hit, you might just want to kind of bomb the entire column or the entire row around it, rather than checking all 4 of the adjacent spots and seeing which direction the ship goes in. Mm-hmm. And I guess the reasoning behind this is that in both cases, you'll probably sink the ship in a couple turns. Right. But in the first case, if you just bomb the whole column, you have like kind of a 50-50 to get rid of a ship of your opponents in a single turn.
Right.
And that means that they fire 1 less shot on their next turn. So yeah, that can be pretty devastating, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. Getting rid of 1 shot for your opponent is huge. And, like you said, you're not losing much going in a line versus going in a I guess, cross pattern. And yeah, you really have nothing to lose there. And another thing we should mention is, one ship, one shot. Doesn't matter if it's the patrol boat or the carrier. So you don't want to target specific ships more than others, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So getting rid of the carrier is just as important as getting rid of the destroyer, for example, because they both take away a shot from your opponent.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be the only big difference, because I think the other stuff is maybe like, oh, once you hit a ship, do you still hunt with a couple of your other shots, and only target with a few with like one or two of your shots? I think the math on that would probably just even out. I'm not sure. What do you think about that?
Wait, so like if you know you're gonna sink this ship.
Well, say you hit, and then the next round you decide to send two of your shots adjacent to that hit, and then you send two or three of your other shots around the board hunting for another ship.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like it significantly lowers your chance of sinking the ship on this turn, which is not what you want. I mean, because like the reason you're going off in one direction anyway, or not one direction, but like either just horizontally or just vertically, is to give yourself a chance to sink that ship. And so like, let's say all the ships are out on the board and you have one hit, and you're gonna have like 5 shots, right? So you can go like 3 and 2, which like if it's in that direction, it will definitely sink the ship.
Yeah.
Actually, it's possible that it won't too.
Right, because I guess you could be hitting the end of the ship, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
I guess that makes sense. Like I think unless you've already getting rid of the carrier and all your opponent's ships are very short, I feel like it wouldn't necessarily be a good idea to kind of do a half and half strategy where you're still hunting a little bit.
It's like Ron Swanson says, don't half-ass 2 things, whole-ass 1 thing.
Exactly. Yeah.
So,
okay.
Any other points for Salvo before we wrap up?
No, I mean, I'm really just thinking about that other variant where you don't have any information. But
yeah, huge can of worms.
Jeez, I mean, wow.
But, yeah, I mean, I suppose maybe you could fire around those spaces, or like fire just around one of those spaces, and see if you get hits, and try to sort of backward induce the answer that way. But it just seems like it would be so costly. We'd need to think about it a lot more. Maybe we come up with
worth it.
Yeah, maybe we come up with another episode where we dive in, or like mini episode where we dive into that.
Yeah, we'll do a bonus episode. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, for now, we're gonna sign off. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your patience, and want to take another minute to wish John a happy 21st birthday. And thank you to all our listeners. And we will see you next time. We're really excited for our next episode. Have a great weekend and good night.
Yeah, we will see you later. And we had a great time on this show, and we're looking forward to doing many, many more. So this has been How to Beat Your Kids at Board Games. Have a good one.
All right, before we go, a quick editor's note on our Salvo discussion. And please keep in mind, we are not experienced in Salvo, and we couldn't find any strategy advice on the internet. Now, while we said the best targeting strategy once you hit a ship would be to fire in a line pattern rather than a cross pattern, we realized after recording that it might be superior to try a cross pattern first, and then go with the line once you are certain of the ship's orientation, which guarantees a 2-turn sink, no matter the length of the ship. Firing in a line first, by contrast, may waste too many shots, and may even take as many as 3 turns to sink large ships. We definitely still think our advice to be generally aggressive is good advice. This way, you do so even more efficiently. Happy firing!